Good afternoon, everybody. It is Friday afternoon. We're wrapping the week up again with our Food for Thought session. And one that's a question that often comes up and the topic, particularly in winter. And we're looking at vitamin D today. It's called our sunshine vitamin, and I'll get into all of that, why it is. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into what it is, what it does in the body, and maybe just some tips to keep it front of mind throughout the year, and why the focus is a little bit more during winter. So pop in here, let me know who's all here, drop some comments into the comment section, or just say hi, like Christina has. Let me know how your week has gone. It's the last week of July. Can you believe it? It's almost August and we are flying through the year. So many things on the go. There's some challenges. We're into the last couple of days of many of our challenges. Obviously, we've got one-on-one ticking through, our awesome special at the moment as well, and all sorts of exciting news coming through next week again. So stay tuned for all of that. Suzanne is here. Nice to see you. Daniela, how are you doing? Karen is here. Beautiful sunny day in Cape Town, isn't it just? It was a little bit chilly this morning, but the sun's out, and I think we've got some better weather ahead over the next few days, which is great. Sandra as well is here. Looking forward to hearing all about our Magic D. Tennille, how are you doing? Lovely to have you guys pop in and say hi. So if there are questions that you have around this as we go, just stick them in there and I'll catch up with them by the end. Anything you want to know in this space, or questions, myths you've heard, things that you want to know a little bit about. This is one aspect that there's all sorts of different things out there. Ava, how's it going in Pinelands? Auntie Pat is here. Beautiful. Nice to have you guys here. So we are going to jump straight into it. And like I said, we're talking about vitamin D. It is a supplement. It is classed as a vitamin. I'll touch on maybe why it shouldn't be as well. But we call it our sunshine vitamin, and there's a real reason for that. So what it is, well, let's first start with supplements in general. Now, I've touched on this picture a couple times before. Supplementation, when we're focusing on nutrition, often gets a lot of focus. Whenever we start changing our diet, trying different things, we want to know, well, what should I be taking to be healthier, to be better, to lose weight, whatever the case is. And a lot of the time we try and build our nutrition pyramid this way around. With supplements, and then we're talking about all the fancy things like meal timing and how much carbs and how much fat and all these sorts of things. And we actually aren't building our pyramid the right way around, which should look something like this. So today's session is all about supplements, but it's a cherry on top. You know how strongly we focus on our eating behaviors and beliefs that need to underpin everything. Then our total food intake and how much fluid we're drinking is going to be the next most important thing. And as we move up our pyramid and get the base layer right, all the other things normally fall into place. So once we've got good behaviors and beliefs, we look at the total food. Am I eating enough? Am I eating too much or too little? Then maybe, all right, where's it all coming from? Once you start getting everything right, the next thing kind of falls into place. Then we might look at meal timing, and to put that cherry on top is the supplements. Now this one, in terms of vitamin D, fits in there, but it also has a bit of a theme that kind of runs down throughout the bit of it. All right, so it is our cherry. It's one of a few of them. And vitamin D, similarly perhaps to something else that's quite common, is iron, because often there's a medical need or a deficiency that we need to treat through supplementation. So we might note through a blood test that there's a deficiency, or there's a health outcome we're trying to improve, and how we'll do that is supplementing it. And supplements might fill the need somewhere else where there's a dietary gap, that you're missing something. Vitamin D, again, might tick the box here. Other things that jump to mind there would be omega-3s or calcium, when we're actually just not consuming them. So we have to look at a supplement for them. And supplements could be practical because logistically they're easier, or we're actually looking for a health or performance outcome. So those are sort of the four areas that would guide us towards considering a supplement. And today we're going to touch on number 1 and 2 for vitamin D. Is there a medical need or a deficiency? or is there a dietary gap? So vitamin D, what it is, it's a fat-soluble nutrient. And there are 4 fat-soluble nutrients: vitamin A, D, E, and K. Those 4 fat-soluble vitamins need fat to be absorbed. So that's why we class those ones together. It's one of our 24 essential micronutrients. And essential, we might actually put that in brackets here, because the body can produce its own. So an essential nutrient, typically the body can't make it, but quite often we aren't exposed to the right environment or situation to be able to create it. And we create it through exposure to the sun. So the main source of vitamin D that we're able to create is in our skin. A chemical reaction takes place when we're exposed to UV rays. Right, and quite typically, I put in there 37 degrees. You've got to be between those two 37-degree parallels. Right, so from the equator to 37 degrees either side. So in South Africa, we're all right. We fall pretty much within that. But once you move further from the equator, your exposure to the right ultraviolet levels is a little bit low. What happens? Your UV is exposed to the skin, and then your body is able to create vitamin D off using some backbones to do it. And cholesterol is one of those as well. So your body actually needs cholesterol to produce vitamin D. That's what you're going to transfer it to. In the diet, we find some vitamin D in a few places, not in large amounts though. So fish, particularly our oily fish, is one place. Some eggs, we also get a bit of vitamin D in there. Mushrooms, so particularly when mushrooms are exposed to UV, they can create vitamin D, and we consume that and we get a version of it. And then some fortified products, so milk or milk alternatives. So some dairy or yogurts have vitamin D added to them. Naturally, they aren't in there. Or a milk alternative like an almond milk or a soya milk is often fortified with it, and you can read a label to see if there's some vitamin D there. And then some grains, so cereals, breakfast cereals, often you might find a little bit of vitamin D in there as well. So reading a label to see if there's maybe a bit of vitamin D coming in from the foods that you eat, or if you're consuming some fish, eggs, mushrooms, you'll get some in that space. Now, what vitamin D does in the body is sort of wide-reaching. Almost every cell in the body has a vitamin D receptor because it plays such an important role across different things. And we originally just thought about vitamin D and bone health. Vitamin D was sort of found through studying people who presented with rickets, bone or sort of irregularities, poor formation of bone. And then looking, right, well, this person's deficient in vitamin D, that must be its role. Since then, we've learned more and more to understand what it actually does. So vitamin D floats around in your body in the form called calcitriol. That's the active form of vitamin D. It goes to the liver and the kidneys where it's activated into this form. And it actually is a hormone. So we wouldn't typically class it as a vitamin because it acts more like a hormone. Your body can create it. It can activate it like it would with a hormone. And then it goes around the body to all the different cells where there's a receptor for vitamin D. And these are the different things that it can influence. So one is that it regulates calcium and phosphate levels, and that impacts bone health, bone growth, and remodeling. There's always a high turnover of bone. So even every day, it's an active tissue. Your body's breaking some down and creating a little bit more. That happens to a greater extent when you're young and developing, but it continues throughout life. So you need to make sure that your calcium and phosphate levels are well managed, and vitamin D is at the heart of that. It also modulates cell growth. So the cells in your body, how they grow, perhaps why it's found in eggs is because eggs are going to grow into a complete organism at the end of it. It needs vitamin D to enable a lot of that happening. So it makes sense. Neuromuscular function, so that's your nerves and muscles being able to activate and function a little bit more effectively because of vitamin D. Immune function is one that we're learning more and more about. Particularly in deficient vitamin D states, people are more susceptible to infection and illness. So we know by being or having an optimal vitamin D level that immune function is just modulated a little bit better. And similarly, inflammation. So it helps to control inflammation. not allow excessive inflammation to take place. Cognition is another one. So how your brain functions. There's a role that vitamin D plays in there. And then looking at long-term health risks, there are a couple of things that we're starting to see that having a good level of vitamin D improves the risk of. And this is reducing risk of cancer, reducing the risk of heart disease, diabetes, and even multiple sclerosis. For people who supplement with vitamin D, we also see an increased level of testosterone. So when vitamin D is deficient, testosterone levels are often quite low as well. So you can see it's broad reaching in a number of different places that it sort of ticks on. So it's worth us knowing and understanding what it does and what your levels are. So the goals, essentially we like to set goals of blood levels. And having a vitamin D test done is very easy. Any lab, path lab you can go into, you can have a blood test done. Next time you're doing your glucose or your cholesterol, you can request just having your vitamin D done, and we'd measure for your levels and then equate them against some norms. Now, a deficiency would typically be less than 30 nanomoles per liter. And this deficient state is what is picked up in terms of sort of children who develop rickets, or an adult's osteomalacia, which is poor bone density, high turnover, and that over time could lead to osteoporosis and breaks and fractures and that type of thing. So having a deficiency in vitamin D is quite likely going to lead to that. But we've even got sort of other levels of it. So it's not just about being deficient or not. We're actually learning that there's maybe an in-between level and then an optimal level that we want to try and strive for. So if we're between 30 and 50, it might still be insufficient to tick all those boxes of the roles that it plays. So we might not have the extreme end of poor bone health, but it might mean that immune function's compromised, or cognition's compromised, or you haven't optimized your intake to achieve all of the health benefits that you can. That level of adequacy seems to be about 50 to 75 nanomoles and a little bit higher. And that's where we really want to shoot for. So you can have a look at your blood tests, see where you're at. And then if any dietary change or supplementation is needed, you can plug it in. The other side to it as well is realizing that we can actually have too much. So as with most things, too much or more isn't always better. There's kind of a ceiling. So we can get to toxicity with vitamin D. And one of the reasons we don't want to supplement at high levels for too long is because of this. Your fat-soluble vitamins can also be stored, and the turnover isn't as high as water-soluble vitamins. So if you have a very high amount, it can get stored, and you can reach toxicity with doing that. So once we get to very, very high levels, there can be some downside to it. So if you are supplementing at a high dose, it's also why we'd want to regularly check blood levels every 3 or 4 months, see where you're at, and you'll know when the time to kind of come down from a high intake would be. So how we do this, firstly, is just through lifestyle. Safe sun exposure. Make sure you're getting a little bit of sun so you can naturally produce some vitamin D. We might only need about 15 minutes a day, particularly in summer when we're a little closer to the equator. If you're further away, you might not even through sun exposure be able to create enough vitamin D. But get what you can. A beautiful day like this in Cape Town, the sun's shining, and go get a little bit of sun. Take your lunch outside, go sit outside and soak it up. In summer, it's going to be a little bit easier, but we still want to encourage some safe sun exposure. Sunscreen does seem to reduce your absorption of UV. That's obviously what it does. And in that instance, it is going to reduce the amount of vitamin D created. So for those 15 minutes, it might be prudent to say, well, I'll give myself 10 to 15 minutes of sun before putting some sunscreen on. Or if you're going to be in the sun all day, it will slowly drip through and help create a little bit of vitamin D. One of the reasons we're seeing deficiencies more and more these days is our life kind of revolves away from the sun. We spend a lot of time indoors. We're training early or late. We're training indoors instead of outdoors. And so our natural exposure to sun is a little bit down. We might be wearing long sleeves all the time or long pants, a cap, sunglasses. So all of your skin is hidden and it might actually make it a little bit more different. So just some things to bear in mind in terms of how you're exposed. You can also change your diet around a little bit. I mentioned some of the vitamin D rich foods. Are you having any of them? A little bit of oily fish? Are you having some mushrooms? Are you eating some eggs and getting at least some exposure from vitamin D? If not, are you then looking for some fortified foods, fortified grains and cereals, the milk that you're buying or the milk alternative? Is it one that's perhaps got a little bit of vitamin D in it? So we can make some lifestyle and diet changes before we worry too much about supplementation. However, if we're deficient and off those cutoffs, if you have a vitamin D deficiency, you are very unlikely to be able to overcome it from diet alone because our diet's not quite good enough and supplementation is going to be needed. So to treat a deficiency, we'd normally look at treating it with between 5,000 and 10,000 units of vitamin D3 every day. You'll need a prescription for anything above 5,000, so your doctor will be able to write that up for you. There are a couple of products in the market where you'll get about 4,000 or 5,000 that you can just buy over the counter. And that's the only way really to treat a deficiency. You'd take it, and in 3 months' time, you'd measure your blood levels again and see how effective it is. You'd obviously want to take it with a fat-containing food as well to improve the absorption. So it might be, if you're supplementing with an omega-3, you'll take them together at the same time. Or you're having a meal that's got some nice, decent, healthy fat in it, it's going to improve the absorption. Some avocado or the eggs, you'll get a dietary source plus a little bit of fat from it, and that's going to help your body absorb it. So making sure we're taking it effectively is going to help. The consideration for blanket supplementation is something worth discussing as well, even if you're not deficient. So personally, I normally take 1,000 units of vitamin D through winter because I know I'm not exposed to sun. I also know I'm quite prone to vitamin D deficiency from a couple of blood tests. I have a check at them sort of every couple of months and see what's happening. And my vitamin D levels are normally on the low side. So having a little low dose of it, 1,000 units through winter, maybe 500 units through summer when I can still get a little bit of sun is prudent. I'm never going to supplement at very high levels, particularly 10,000 or more, unless that's medically supervised. So that's something you and your doctor will discuss, but on the lower side, you'd be able to get away with that, just to keep the levels up when there isn't sun or when it's not winter that you might want to have a look at. All right, so that is a little background into vitamin D. Hopefully kind of gives you some thought to it. You can think both from a lifestyle point of view, as well as a diet and a supplementation, kind of where we're at and what needs to be considered. If you haven't had a blood test for it in a while, go and have it done. Next time you're having something looked into, just add it onto your request form, or if your doctor's there, I can just tick the box for you and you can have it part of it. I think it's something we should all be doing once or twice a year. If you've got a deficiency, it might be twice a year. Otherwise, it'll just be annually part of your checkup. Look at it. Because we can test it and because we can influence it and because we know that there are aspects we can change to improve a health outcome, it's worth keeping it front of mind. So yes, it's topical for winter, but that's not the only time that it really needs to be thought about. And we can carry it throughout the season and see where we're at with it. Okay, that's me. That's vitamin D in a nutshell. I want to pop into the comments and see if there were any questions. Kerry was actually sitting outside having her lunch, getting some vitamin D, and then saw the topic. So perfect timing. Hopefully you've got a little bit of skin exposed to the sun. Particularly for some reason, it might be the skin, particularly at the back of the hands, the eyelids. They seem to be good places that vitamin D gets produced. So make sure your arms, your legs, they get a bit of exposure to sun because that's where your body wants to create vitamin D from. So don't always cover up. Be safe, but a little bit of safe sun exposure is going to help. Daniela, if you take a vitamin D supplement and your body doesn't need it, does it cause any damage? At very high levels, yes. So you most probably sent that through before I mentioned toxicity. You're not going to get to a toxic level from dietary sources of vitamin D. And if you're supplementing with 500 to 1,000 units a day, you're also very unlikely to get there. But beyond 5,000 and 10,000 definitely, you can get to toxic levels stored in the liver and the kidneys and whatnot. So you wouldn't do that. If you are supplementing at high levels, that's why it's prudent to every 3 or 4 months just have a check what your levels are so that you can optimize it. You want to shoot for that 75 number, and if you're there and thereabouts, you wouldn't need to carry on as much. Lauren, yes, the sun is shining in Cape Town. Joyce, loving the topic, beautiful. Kath, how are you doing? Nancy, just saying it's very interesting, beautiful. Natalie here. Kathleen, always nice to see you pop in as well. I'm loving how many people are getting a bit of sun while they're listening to this. So Auntie Pat was getting some sun. Kim, how are you doing? Judith, you guys are hopefully getting a bit of sun in Scotland. I don't know. It's summer, but almost going into autumn. So the days might start getting a little lower now or shorter. But you guys being beyond that sort of 37 degrees, definitely something in the UK we need to think about, particularly going into winter, the vitamin D levels, and worth having a look at those as you guys move into winter now. Kath says it's so interesting having to isolate. COVID fatigue is terrible, isn't it? So also getting some fresh air, just missing your natural vitamin D. I think we all thrive for summer, Kathleen. I'm very much a warm or a cold-blooded person, I think I could say. I need the sun. I need it to not only and one of the things that might interest that as well is sun exposure and the impact it has on mood. And vitamin D might be part of that your body's producing a little bit more, and how it acts on the central nervous system in your mood and your cognition. One of those things could be related to vitamin D. Linda, just discussed this with your dermatologist yesterday. As you're so fair that I avoid the sun totally. Interesting. Interesting timing. So I'd be interested to know how you plan to do that. Sharon's here and popping in to say hi. Suzanne, lost your connection for a second. Do you need sun on your bare skin in order for it to be absorbed? How much exposed skin, face and head, or do you need more exposure? So the more surface area that's exposed, the more effective it's going to be. It's about 10 to 15 minutes of sun exposure. So that's all you need. It's not a lot. And, as Linda said, who is a little fairer, maybe you're going to do a little bit less, get the sunscreen on, and then just try to spend a little bit longer in the sun. But over winter, where the sun is further away, the UV effect is going to be lower. You could spend a little bit more time in there, but you can. It can be as simple as trying to get maybe the legs, back of hands, face, and that's going to get some sun. But whatever you can do. And it will just be directly related to how much surface areas getting UV on it. Linda must be deficient because you've been inside for the whole of summer with the exception of 3 days and you do not take a supplement. So it'll be an interesting one. End of winter and end of summer would be good times to kind of have a look at where you're at. And you'll start to understand your own body's natural kind of turnover of vitamin D. You can then create your own trends and you'll know, all right, well, typically through summer, my levels are good. I don't have to supplement. I get enough sun. Going into winter, all of a sudden they drop, and then you can start planning ahead in your own kind of approach to it through summer, working harder to get in those fortified food sources or supplementing if you need to. But I like to say test, don't guess. And that's particularly true for supplements like vitamin D and iron for that matter. Kerry, how costly is vitamin D test? It's not very costly. It's a couple $100. So think 250 Rand when you add it onto all of your other tests. I think that's where it is about. So it's not inaccessible at all. Nancy, an eye opener. Glad it has been. Can't we have a day off in the sun per week? Yeah, write that in as part of your employee benefits, your health at work. Make sure that there's sun exposure to get that, because you will be more productive. I can almost guarantee it. Karen, just saying hi and good info. It's beautiful. Charlene has had a vitamin D deficiency for years, but all back to normal now. So Charlene, I assume through supplementation, is really the only way we can overcome a true deficiency, because it's just hard from the diet. The diet can support it, But if we've got a deficiency, to treat it. That is one way we have to. So in Scotland, Judith says it's been glorious for 3 weeks. You're very lucky. England's had some flooding and storms. You get yours prescribed every day. Exactly. Linda, going to have to use supplements because as a redhead, you burn even in the shade. So there again it is. So you want to be safe. Obviously, there's downside to sun exposure. And if there's any risk that we want to avoid, we've got an alternative. We can still do it, and we just do it from a supplement, and that's fine because we're mitigating the risk of excessive sun exposure. Charmaine's going to catch up tonight. It's cool. Charlene was supplementing with calciferol. Exactly. Sue's saying very interesting. Beautiful. Guys, so I hope it has been interesting, and I hope it's given you something to kind of think about and maybe something to add to your next assessment. Remember, it's not always about how you feel or look. It's about what's happening under the hood. You guys might have heard me say that a little bit. We've got to pop the hood sometimes and know what's happening under there. So have a look into these things. Understand your physiology and your metabolism a little bit deeper. A blood test so that you can keep on top of it. We won't know unless we dig into it. So next time around, have a look at it, see where you're lacking and how we can improve on it. And then we've at least got a path that we can do it. So something to think about. Guys, have a beautiful Friday. Join us for our workout tomorrow. Big way to finish the week. If you're on the challenges, it's the last one for the 21 days as well, apart from the challenges that have just kicked off. And we want to finish on a high. And then next week, we'll see you guys and keep going, keep doing it all again. The activity, the efforts, the impetus is picking up. Things are slowly changing. Life's returning back to normal. And the sun's starting to shine again. And we can push hard through the next little while. So it'll be a happy August for us all. And I'm going to see you guys in August. Can you believe it? So have a fabulous weekend. Till next time, guys. Cheers for now.